Hey, welcome back to That's What He Said. I'm your host, Natalie, and this is a podcast about dating. Before you watch, make sure you subscribe, follow, like, comment, rate, review, and share the show. Let's find out what he said.
So I just want to introduce you really quick. I'm here with Dr. Kathryn Heidt, who I just found through Instagram, functional medicine doctor, who I just love your content. I think you have like over 15K followers or so.
A little less by now. When you post controversial stuff, sometimes people don't like it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I can strongly relate to that as well. So I'm really excited. Today we're going to be talking about health and specifically hormones. So our topic question today is, are your hormones keeping you single? And that might sound like a really weird question, but our hormones, our health are strongly related to our behavior and our feelings and thought patterns and things like that. So let's just dive right into it. Kathryn, if you'll introduce yourself. I guess I should call you Dr. Height. That's probably the polite thing, or the proper thing.
I usually just go by Dr. Kathryn. It keeps it a little more casual. But.
Okay. I'm curious to know kind of like how you got into functional medicine. Everyone kind of has a story typically behind that. And if you'll sort of give an explanation of it. So for people who are not familiar with what functional medicine is, as opposed to conventional medicine.
Yeah, so I think you're spot on. Most of us who dare to venture into the alternative side of medicine really have our own reasons for it, right? Of whether it's our own health journey or something that was someone very close to us. Ultimately, I got into this because I was raised with a more holistic perspective on life. My mom was always like, trying different things, like, oh, let's mince garlic and have you drink this tincture. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. I'm 13, So
Yeah.
definitely a lot of just emphasis from my mom and just trying to be more holistically healthy, right? But I thought I wanted to go into medicine until I was working in a hospital through college, and I just saw things that I didn't really want to be. I didn't want that to be my career, right? It's nothing wrong with it. It just was things that I was like, oh, well, we could offer them this medicine, or maybe, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, just things like that kind of started pulling at my attention. So I kind of bought myself some time with a master's in biochemistry, and my research there was about preventative health with nutrition, specifically for brain health, which equates to hormone health.
Yes.
But which I think we're going to get into a little bit. But ultimately, it was just so eye-opening of preventative health, preventative medicine, being proactive when we're young and otherwise healthy is the way to go before the diseases and all that kind of stuff and the diagnoses. So it's evolved a lot over the last 12 years, but that's kind of the trajectory of it. So functional medicine, some people love the term, some people don't. But I think ultimately it's just trying to get back to the fundamentals of what helps us stay well, right? Or understanding deeply the physiology of how the body works and taking it as a whole, as opposed to all the specialists of endocrinology and oncology and rheumatology. They're smarter than I will ever be in their one bubble, right? And there's not a whole lot of crosstalk, especially not with the way our insurance system is really set up. So you get referred and referred and referred. And so really functional medicine just tries to take a lot of breadth, a lot of knowledge from all of that and look at the whole body and say, well, let's plug one and one together and it's probably going to equal two, right? And so we just kind of have a more holistic, like whole body perspective on how to get people well and or keep people well.
Yeah. So like, for example, if you mentioned like mental health, if you have a struggle with your mental health within functional medicine, you're not just going to go to a psychiatrist, that issue that's going on in your mind might be the root of it might be in your liver or something like that.
Right.
Is that kind of a good example?
And, 100%. I love co-managing. I think that's another thing with, provider to provider. We've got some out there who are much more willing to outright diss the medical side, but I think there's always a time and a place, right? We need both. We need to be able to build that healthcare team that helps us have all the answers, well, at least as many as we can identify. But right, if you need a counselor or therapy or someone to help you organize your thoughts with maybe depression, maybe anxiety, that's great. And then I'm going to tell you, keep doing that. But at the same time, there's a reason in your body that this is happening. And so we just need to identify the various triggers.
Yeah, that root cause. Yeah,
Regardless.
awesome. Okay. So of course this is a dating podcast. So I do want to ask you, I know you're married and do you have kids?
No kids. No
No
kids.
kids. Okay. So
Dogs.
how did you meet your husband, and tell us sort of that story of y'all's love story and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, we met on Hinge.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, I was on there. I was the person who would be on Hinge for like literally 24 hours and be like, "This sucks, delete." Just
Yes.
did not like it. I think he was a serial online dater at that point, but I had hopped on it for 48 hours. Literally, he was one of my first conversations. We ended up having a date within a week, and uh, realized actually that we were the two people that a good friend of ours was trying to set each other up with for the last couple of years.
Oh
So
wow,
had no
that's
idea. We
funny.
just happened to meet, yeah, and we were just like, oh, okay. And then a few months in, we're pretty set on, yeah, I think this is probably the right thing. So
Oh, well,
rest is
that's a
history.
success story. I feel like I
Yeah,
tend to like hate on the dating apps because there's just so much like toxic culture that comes from it. But
me
every
too.
once in a while, I hear like
Mhm.
a success story, and I'm like, okay, so we can't like just completely discount them.
Yeah, I get it. They were so annoying to me, but I would, download it and delete it, and it just happened to be in one of those little spurts that we struck up a conversation, and I still deleted it. We went on a date, and there we go. So yeah,
Yeah,
time and
yeah,
place, maybe.
awesome. I love it. Okay, so let's sort of get into our topic, and I want to start by talking about imbalanced hormones, which I think is sort of a super hot topic right now, especially for women. And men too can also have imbalanced hormones, but I think it's rampant right now. It's something that I have struggled with, that I'm still working on kind of finding what helps me be balanced and just recognizing the patterns within my own body and sort of detoxing from birth control and things like that. Um, so, do you think it's possible that with just the rampant amount of imbalanced hormones that we're seeing in women, that could be a cause or a correlation of today's low marriage rates? Because we know that the marriage rate is getting lower and lower. So we've got more and more single people that are being single for longer. Do you think that there's any sort of relation there, especially when we consider that most single people don't want to stay single forever? You know, they want to be married, but there's sort of this disconnect. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's important to recognize that for both men and women, hormones play a huge role in just overall how we feel, right? So if we end up with, falling for someone, getting married, and well, let me start with the conversation on birth control, right? This is
Okay.
not anti-birth control. It's let's just talk about a big factor here. More and more women were put on birth control in the last 10, 15 plus years, right? And studies are now showing, and this is something anyone can look up. It's available, readily available. But what that's shown is that when a woman is on birth control versus off birth control, her interests change, right? And so a lot of women who might be on birth control and then when they get married, come off of birth control, things can change. Some of their desires change, some of their male feature desires change. There's a lot of really interesting stuff coming out about the impact on birth control and partner selection, mate selection. And so I think that's an important factor just with the rising rates on both fronts, right? A lot of women have been on birth control, and a lot of, more and more we're seeing the marriage rates and failure. So there's
Yeah.
that aspect, right? Not to linger too long on that, and certainly not to blame it. It plays its role, right? Birth control. But, when it comes to a happy and successful marriage, it takes two, and men can certainly have imbalanced hormones as well. And so, what we're also seeing is that testosterone is becoming more and more of an issue for men, right? Low testosterone, while women are having lower estrogen, lower progesterone, all these ovulatory issues. And so, I think part of the issue is we're not feeling like our best selves, right? And
Yeah.
women, there's so many things that are affecting our hormones, which we'll get into, I'm sure, as we go. But if there's so many things affecting our hormones, it's affecting how we feel on a day-to-day basis and about how we feel about ourselves, which also spills over into relationships. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the highest time frames of a woman's life when a divorce would happen is when she's kind of in that perimenopausal or even postmenopausal time frame, 45 to 55, let's say.
Oh, okay.
And well, most women do not go through menopause very comfortably. So they're miserable. their intimacy and libido interest are gone, done. If they were ever really there to begin with, they at least don't want to pretend anymore. And the male is getting more and more frustrated, and or the partner, and the woman's feeling worse about herself and starts to gain a little weight, and all these things just kind of implode until maybe both parties find freedom. And there's a lot to be said of that too. But yeah, so I think that is definitely a possibility. Even though I don't know if studies are really going into that just yet, epidemiologically, so to speak. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it could definitely be playing a role.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with just kind of the imbalance of hormones on both sides, on both the women's side and the men's side, and we're just kind of not feeling like our best selves. Like you're not operating at a high frequency, you could say, or a place where you feel like peaceful and good and happy. And of course, that's going to affect your dating life. And then especially when you throw in things that are actually altering your hormones, like birth control, which is not an anti-birth control ad here, but it's a reality. It's a huge thing. I definitely when I came off of the pill, I was on the pill from when I was 17 for the sole reason of I had really bad, painful periods, like to the point I couldn't go to school, like hunched over in bed. And so that was the solution, was to just take birth control. And when I was in my early 20s, I got off of it because I was already into my sort of awakening with holistic health and things like that, and was just kind of like, why am I taking this? I don't need this. And I was in a relationship at the time, and I'm not going to say it's because of that, but within 6 months I broke up with him and I had just lost interest. And so I don't know. There's definitely a correlation, because it does say, they do say it changes your interests, but it's interesting because I'm like, wow, I wonder what other choices I would have made differently had I never taken it. So segueing into that, how do you think as women, our hormones affect our behavior? Because we know as women that we can feel that, like certain times of the month, you obviously act differently than others. You feel differently. Sometimes you're going to feel really happy and energized and strong and high libido. And then other times you're like, I hate life. Life is terrible. Like I'm depressed. And you can switch back and forth within a couple of days. So on a bigger scale, how do you think that is affecting our behavior on a day-to-day and in relationships and like our mate selection, as I think you described it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just education there and knowledge about ourselves. Women don't, maybe your listeners are a unique group, so I'm not going to offend anyone here when I say it. Let's just scale out. Most women do not know anything more than go a couple weeks or go a month or so, bleed, right? Go about a month or so, here's my period again, right? They just don't know anything other than that. And if they're on birth control, then maybe no period at all, right? We're so out of touch with the cycling changes that our body makes on a week to week basis. Some women understand, okay, it's about a month of a cycle and then a period. And some women understand that there's two main phases to that. First half and the second half of the cycle. Great. But let's take it even a step further. There's actually 4 main steps to this, right? The first week, the second week, the third week, and the fourth. Arbitrary. We've got some with shorter cycles and longer cycles. It can all be normal. It can be completely their normal. But roughly these 4 weeks, and you feel different on each week. And you feel a little different at the beginning versus the end of this week. And then you're kind of edging up on this week and then into this week. And you feel different. You feel different within yourself. Your strengths and weaknesses change throughout the month, not physically, just in general. Think, things that you're good at, like focus or whatever it is, that's going to change throughout the month for a cycling female. And so women reclaiming knowledge of their own bodies and what they're doing. But the second biggest part of that is men need to know it too. Okay, they get off a little easy. They're pretty even keel. They've got the 24-hour clock, sleep wake. That's about it. Their bodies don't fluctuate hormones. They've got the most fluctuation they really experience is this roughly 90-day sperm turnover, right? And that's about it. But otherwise, their testosterone and everything is pretty steady, and it changes a little throughout the day, but nothing much, right? Just kind of like cortisol rises and falls. So men are kind of able to just hang out. And that's why they're typically much less symptomatic when things go a little wrong, because everything's pretty balanced, or at least level anyways, that an imbalance is not going to affect them quite as soon or quite as significantly as women who are phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 on a week to week basis. So I really am a big fan of partners understanding what both parties are going through. So in the case of a male and a female, the dude needs to help you, or at least he needs to understand what you're going through on a week to week basis, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
example, intimacy and drive, the libido, that's not constant for us like it is for a man necessarily. It shouldn't be. That's not normal. Actually, if someone tells me that it's, all the time, anytime libido as a woman, I'm like, well, that's maybe not quite right, right?
Mm-hmm.
We really have this kind of peak mid-cycle, and then things kind of calm back down, and we want a little bit of space, and that's fine. And we need our partners to understand that too. So just kind
Yeah.
of both parties need to be involved.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So if we have this, like, we're designed to have this monthly cycle, or 28 days, or however around that range, 25, 30 days. And each week is supposed to be different. I was just thinking about this. I have a guy friend who the first time that I met him, people were just like in conversation. He was sitting across from me, and he was like, we only get, talking about like, if you have a girlfriend, he's like, we only get one good week out of you guys out of the month. I was like, excuse me? And he goes, well, you have the good week when you're not on your period. Then you have the week where it's the week before your period. So you're like, oh, I'm about to start my period. And then you have your period, which is just like, I don't even want to talk to you. And then you have the week after your period, which you're like, oh, I'm just getting off my period. And I was like, don't say that out loud. That's not,
Yeah.
just keep that to yourself, or maybe like when you're only talking to guys. But I mean, I understand where he's coming from, but that's definitely not an empathetic standpoint. So I completely agree with you. But so if we have that monthly cycle, which is healthy and normal to be different and feel different from on a week to week or day to day basis, what does it look like when a woman has imbalanced hormones? How is she going to feel? What's going to be off? How is she going to behave differently? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it might look like they kind of all blend together, right? Let's say that the week before your period, when emotions can be a little bit heightened. But let me also clarify what's normal and not normal, right?
Okay.
What is normal is that these changes week to week at any given point in your cycle are subtle, right? They shouldn't be dramatic. They shouldn't be dictating your decisions or anything like that. It's really just more so, it's a subtle, if you become more and more self-aware and just invite that awareness to yourself, set the intention in the morning. How do I feel? What am I going to be strong in today, right? It's not focus. Nope. Okay, let's do something else. A lot of my colleagues will joke about, don't make me work in my luteal phase, right? don't do a podcast in luteal phase. Hello, late luteal phase right here. But we make a joke of like, oh, that brain fog was because of, the timing of my cycle, but we were still able to do the work, right? Or still able to do what we needed to do. So these changes should be very subtle, right? So with imbalanced hormones, through those, we'll say 4 phases of the cycle, what you experience is a lot more dramatic change, right? Where on your period, maybe you are down and out, right? Like your friend was describing, he's probably describing some women that we all know that, like, yeah, you've got 4 very distinct weeks, and only one of those weeks do you feel okay, right? Or let alone have any interest in, in anything much. So I think we see a lot of increased rawness to the emotional state, whether it's sad or angry or irritable, whatever it is. Different hormone imbalances will present with different emotional imbalances. So I'd say that through your cycle, those changes should be very subtle. If you're, and it shouldn't even last a week. It really shouldn't. Your PMS, premenstrual syndrome, that's something we just kind of accept as normal, but it's just common. It's not normal. You should have very minor changes, and maybe just, again, when you're more in tune with your body, just feeling, I'm a little less social. I'm just going to politely decline that invite. I just would rather sit with myself or read a good book, right? But it shouldn't be anything dramatic, okay? Like I can't because I'm upset, or, you can't keep a balanced mind or balanced state of emotions, having deep conversations with a partner, if you need to have those conversations. Everything should be pretty steady for you with those subtle shifts, right? So if we've got big emotions rising, that's a sign that something's not quite right. Right.
Okay.
Now, I want to point out with that, it could be a hormone imbalance. I'd say most women can do some support to their hormones, right? We just live in a world that's pretty anti-stability of our hormones. But it could be hormones, but it also could be that we're not having the right conversations that need to be had, right? So I just want to kind of tease that apart too, that for women in that relationship, whether it's a serious relationship or marriage, sometimes we blame women's hormones, but it might be a communication error too, right? And this is something I'm really careful, especially with libido. And a woman's like maybe 43 and she's like, yeah, I just have no interest anymore. And I'm like, well, you know, do you need hormonal support or do you need couples counseling? Or, you know, what's not being said here, you know, spouse to spouse, what needs to be discussed deeply. So I want to make sure that we clarify that too, that sometimes it's just things that need to be said. Get it off your chest. The other side too, male too. Sometimes they take the quiet ones, but
yes. Oh yeah, definitely. And maybe too, it can be like a combination of all of it. Cause
Yes.
I'm kind of thinking of, there was a specific scenario I had with a guy I was dating last year, and everything was kind of going great. And there was a day where everything just sort of imploded. And I think I had an attitude about something that we were disagreeing on. And I was just being kind of really dismissive and short and kind of sharp with it. And I was definitely PMSing. I was like a day or two before my period. And that's a huge thing that I have had, especially when I can tell my hormones are not balanced or in a healthy place, is this extreme, like almost uncontrollable irritability where I can just like be set off by the slightest thing that wouldn't normally trigger me to that extent. Maybe it is a trigger, like, you know, maybe there is a communication thing there, an emotional underlying thing, but then having this shadow of an imbalanced hormones to where like it sends you outside of your body. Like it shouldn't be that dramatic. So I feel like I see that too. And it's kind of sometimes hard to see in the moment when you're in that PMS state or you're in that irritability state. And then a few days later, you're like, why did I react like that? Like I was totally overreacting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it can kind of become this like perfect storm, and then that affects your overall behavior. And then maybe your partner is like, whoa, you know, she's crazy, which we've all heard. And you're like, am I crazy?
Yeah, no, that's well said. And it's so true. It's both, right? It can be so many factors in any of this, right, are definitely applicable. But you know, if there are things that need to be said, or conversations, or if it's just not a very pleasant relationship, but there's a lot of bickering anyways, well, yeah, sure, then you go throw PMS in there and it's go time, buddy, right?
Yeah.
You can come out with, you know, guns a-blazing, you're ready to go, like test me, I
Yeah.
dare you.
Yeah.
But even with those emotions and the rawness of some of those responses, and a little bit more irritable and a little bit more just like, you know, maybe sad or whatever it is, that can be somewhat normal. And this is where it goes back into both parties understanding what you're going through too. That yeah, things are at a more raw state. Things are at a more tense state for me and my emotions today. Right. So understand that, please. Saying to your partner, understand that, please, and give me that grace, right, to help me get through the next couple of days with more stability. And then let's talk about it in about, you know, a week from now when things are a little calmer. So yeah, it's definitely both. And it definitely boils back around to that whole party education.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know on your page, I've seen you talk a few times about brain health, and I don't fully understand all of it, but like how your pituitary gland, I know you've mentioned a couple of things about that, maybe other glands that are sort of in charge of these hormones. So we know functional medicine is like root cause medicine. We want to get to the root and address that. So can you kind of explain some of those things, like how the brain, because if we're a woman watching right now might be going, oh, wow, I think my hormones are very imbalanced based on what they're saying. And so then it's like, okay, well, why? And how do we find out why? And how do we get to that root issue? Because it could be something in the brain. I know there's also the gut brain health connection. So Can you take us kind of a layer deeper into that?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics. So I have a lot of women that come to me for their hormone symptoms, right? And I'll tell them, yes, you definitely have hormonal symptoms, but there is something else. 9 times out of 10, there is something else, multiple things, other things affecting your hormones, right? Hormones just kind of get the blame because they scream the loudest, right? They're the most symptomatic when they are imbalanced. So hormones are often blamed, when in reality, there's other things going on that disrupt the hormones, and then the hormones scream the loudest. We have the most symptoms from hormone imbalances. Okay. So, what are those other things? Gut health, overall stress response on the body, inflammation, liver health, vitamins and minerals, diet and getting enough. Women are generally just not eating enough, let alone enough nutritious and fueling foods. So there's so many other factors that affect the body and result in hormone imbalances. And generally, as women, because we are such dynamic creatures, yeah, the hormone imbalance is the one that kind of gets the loudest claim to the symptoms. And so then we go, oh, it must be estrogen, right? Or it must be PCOS and high androgens, or it must be low progesterone. And sure, there's some classic symptoms with each of those. Generally speaking, if a woman has anxiety, a lot of anxiety, especially before her period, I am thinking about weak ovulation, therefore weak and low progesterone. If she's got a lot of and she can't lose that 10 pounds and she just feels bloated and icky and really heavy, long clotting periods and a lot of emotional symptoms with hormone changes, I'm thinking high estrogen, right? So there are definitely some cue-ins to this, but okay, is her body overmaking the estrogen, or is she being exposed to too many synthetic estrogens in the environment? Okay. A lot of plastics, a lot of chemicals, a lot of pesticides, fragrance in our candles, stuff in our cleaning supplies, our beauty supplies. A lot of those contain chemicals that mimic estrogen in our bodies. And so is it really a hormone problem, or is it a toxicity problem? Right? So that's kind of where I like to educate patients on, is that yes, I talk a lot about hormones and I talk a lot about how they should be and how you should feel and what it looks like when they're normal and abnormal. But at the end of the day, it's probably not your hormone's fault. Okay. It's these other things. And so I see a lot of inflammatory problems. I see a lot of stealth, kind of chronic low grade GI infections, which may not look like a whole lot of GI or gut, bowel movement type, bloating type, reflux type of symptoms, but it could still be an underlying cause to driving up this inflammatory response in the body and throwing off your hormones. And again, we're so dynamic, this week to week stability and balance that our hormones require in the body. If there's something like that going on, that will wreak havoc on that stability. Okay. So yeah, so there's a lot of non-hormonal things impacting our hormones, giving us the hormone symptom.
Yeah. So how does that happen? Like, let's say, what are the main two root causes that you normally see? So if you say, I see a lot of issues with the pituitary gland, or I see a lot of gut issues, what would be the main the most common one or two issues that you see yourself addressing with women who have hormone imbalances? And explain like how, because if someone watching might be going, first of all, what's a pituitary gland? And second of all, how is that related at all to my period if it's in your brain?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I would separate it just like that. The two major broad categories here would be brain-body connection and toxicity. Okay, well, so let's start with the brain-body connection and come back to toxicity. So
Okay.
with the brain-body connection, your hormones don't do anything unless they're told to, okay, by your brain. So the analogy I like to make is that you've got these two small little parts of your brain that kind of hang down right into the center here, called the hypothalamus and the pituitary. So there's the pituitary. But let's get rid of those fancy names and just call it mom and dad. Okay?
Okay.
So mom and dad are in your head, and they have to communicate. They have to coordinate, and it's all based on what feedback they've got. So mom and dad have listened to what's going on, say from the kiddos, right? They've heard what's going on, and then they go and they deliberate. They're talking together. And then they send the signal back to the body. So the analogy I make for all the hormones would be the kids, right? And so they then send that signal down and the kids respond accordingly. Now, there are so many other factors, right? Like a bad neighbor, bad influence, or I don't know, the kid got red dye 40 and is going berserk and crazy from too much sugar and red dye 40. So there's all these other factors, but mom and dad communicate and they try to tell the kids or the hormones what to do, and the kids are still subject to their own environment of what their their own reality. But so that's how the brain decides based on what's going on, what needs to be said, what needs to be instructed. And so then it sends that instruction down to the thyroid. So people, we haven't even talked about thyroid hormones. When we're talking about hormones, we've got to include thyroid hormone. So it sends that message to the thyroid. It also sends it to the adrenal glands, which are right above the kidneys in the back. That's where cortisol and a lot of your androgens like testosterone come from. And as well down to the ovaries, which is a lot of what estrogen and progesterone, where they come from. So brain communicates, sends that message down to the body, and the body should respond accordingly. But there's so many other factors there, right? So does that analogy work for one of the main areas that I see here being a brain to body connection problem?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if we have this brain body connection, what would that mean that if you have a hormone imbalance, so maybe you have high estrogen, it could be due to a dysfunction in your thyroid or in your pituitary gland. Is that right?
Yes, thyroid is very connected to estrogen and vice versa, but we'll leave that for another podcast. So that's a whole
Okay.
But it's all very connected, right? Because again, back to this idea, well, what is functional medicine? It's taking the lens off and looking at the whole picture. So let's use estrogen in particular, okay? Because that's kind of an easy one, and it tends to be the most problematic when it's imbalanced. Women become very symptomatic with issues with estrogen. It is not often that your body is just overproducing a lot of estrogen. It is a lot to do with the fact that you produce that estrogen kind of rising by mid-cycle, kind of peaks, and then it's supposed to all lower back down. Well, that lowering back down brings us to that other category of what I see, toxicity. If we've got high toxic load, which we'll get into that a little bit more, your body is detoxing things as best it can, and now it's dealing with all this estrogen, and so it doesn't quite get back to a baseline. So then we start with higher estrogen next time. Make more, higher baseline. Make more, higher baseline. So we end up with this accumulation of estrogen. It's not that your body or that your brain just says, let's just make a lot of estrogen and cause problems, right? Mm-hmm. Your brain's smarter than that. So in the case of, let's say, birth control that uses an estrogen, a synthetic estrogen, it's giving your body a steady, constant supply of that. And the brain goes, oh, well, there's our estrogen. And it stops asking the ovaries for it. Right. Mm-hmm. So and then the same with progesterone. That's how that stops the communication to ovulate. Therefore, helps, beat birth control. But that's just not how our bodies cycle naturally. And it's not the most in tune version of ourselves. Right. And so with the estrogen topic, we have to question, well, how much of that is your body's estrogen versus these synthetic estrogens that get into your body, like parabens and BPA. A lot of people have heard of BPA. Right? This became a big issue. BPA free. This was like one of the first big toxins that got blown up in everyone's faces. And people in the beginning were like turning over a water bottle going, what's BPA? Why is this BPA free? Is that good or bad? Right? People didn't know. Now, almost everyone knows, yeah, we want to avoid BPA. Why? You can look at the chemical structure of it and the chemical structure of estrogen, and they look like sister friends. So all that BPA getting into the body, drinking out of plastic water bottles, heating, plastics with BPA, heating them in the microwave, you get leaching of all these chemicals like phthalates as well. But they look enough like estrogen in the body that it creates high estrogen symptoms, even though it's not all your estrogen. So it can throw off the brain-body communication with that too, because the brain goes, oh, there's our estrogen, and you might end up with estrogen-dominant symptoms and estrogen deficiency symptoms. And we get a mess. Right?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So you might have
the brain-body connection.
You might have estrogen dominant symptoms, but you might actually have low estrogen.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
I think that's what was happening with me. I started on a whole treatment plan and everything with a functional medicine doctor about 1.5 years ago. And I had a huge gut infection that had been ongoing for like more than 6 months. And it was a disaster. I mean, it's something I'm still healing from. It's still, it takes a long time to heal from something like that. And then on top of that, I think, I don't know why, but maybe it's related to the high toxic load that you're talking about. But I was put on something called Estro Protect, and her explanation of it kind of sounds like what you're talking about, where it's ridding your body of like bad estrogens, is what she said. Like my body wasn't disposing of bad estrogens as it was supposed to. So like maybe a detoxifying issue there. But on my Dutch test, which is a very in-depth hormone panel, my estrogen was, well, alarmingly low, like premenopausal low. And so
exactly.
I had to ask so many questions to try to make sense of it, because I was like, wait, I thought you said it was low. Why am I here saying I'm getting rid of estrogen? So it's not as easy as what a specialist, I guess you could say, would typically tell you, or had typically told me. So I guess that goes into what you're talking about with toxic load, right?
Yeah, that segues into that, exactly. And it's there's never an isolated problem, because we live in the world that we live in. There's always going to be multiple layers to this. So yes, there's this disconnect of the brain to body, and then we have to go into, well, why does that disconnect mostly happen? And now we're talking about toxicity levels, right? Whether it's these chemicals that look enough like estrogen that it just wreaks havoc in the body, or stealth gut infections, right? Parasites, bacterial overgrowth, candida, what viruses. There's a lot of stuff that gets into the gut that can be causing a lot of problems, even in someone who doesn't have a lot of GI symptoms. Some of the worst, I do some GI testing as well, and some of the worst test results I've seen are in hormonal females that don't have a lot of GI symptoms, or they're like, well, I guess I'm just a little bit constipated, maybe. So
Interesting. Yeah.
again, not normal, just common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so with talking about the toxicity load, we also have to talk about liver health and gallbladder health. Gallbladder in particular is really sensitive to estrogen levels. And so what do we see a lot in women? It's one of the most common procedures in women is, let's take the gallbladder out. Right?
Oh,
'Cause there's so
really?
many gallbladder symptoms. And I firmly believe that, I think that most of them are related to this chronic problem with estrogen in our women. So yeah, gallbladder and estrogen problems are hand in hand.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's so hard to cover this like in an hour. There's just so many ways that you can go with it. So we have this sort of framework of what imbalanced hormones can look and feel like versus balanced hormones, and potential root causes of the imbalanced hormones, which we're just going to kind of leave it at that, scratch surface of, primarily looking at like toxicity load, gut health, brain health. So if we're going back to dating, how can like long-term or chronic imbalanced hormones lead to unwanted behavior, poor choices, like things that start to affect us as adults in the long term, where you say, yeah, if you start off with imbalanced hormones at 16, this is where your life may be 10, 20, 30 years from now without correcting it.
Yeah, I think that, so let's also pull in this fact clinically that hormone imbalances, in particular estrogenic imbalances, do make women at higher risk of autoimmune diseases. So now we're looking at this chronic hormone imbalance, which leads to other problems, right? Estrogen is really important for the brain. So if estrogen is imbalanced, the brain's not supported as much as it could be. So what do we get? Brain fog, fatigue, focus issues. What do most women experience, at least to some degree? A lot of those things, right? Brain fog and fatigue probably come with every person that comes to my office, right? Where they're like, I just don't think straight anymore. And yes, there's a lot going on, we're pulled in multiple different directions. But why were you able to handle so much for so long and then just brain fog, right? So there's just a lot of connection there. But when it comes down to the autoimmune disease risk, I see that rampantly, whether it's autoimmunity to the thyroid or autoimmunity in the gut or the joints, whatever it is. Well, now if we get near a diagnosis like that, or we have other risk factors and then starting to develop symptoms of a diagnosis that could happen, well, now we just don't feel well, right? There might be joint pain, muscle pain, additional fatigue, sleep issues. So it really starts to compound over time too. I tell a lot of my women who are, let's say a 50-year-old patient comes in and she's like, "Why? I felt fine, and then everything just broke. Oh, you know what? Why? Why all of a sudden?" And my answer is, well, you've had multiple decades of not addressing the root cause, right? And our body holds on, as best it can, and then we just get this link that breaks, and then that link that breaks, and because for so long your body has been in this fight or flight, and all of these things physiologically that we could have seen if we did deep enough testing when you were 22, that was ignored, right? And so yeah, it's starting to spill over into other areas, and you feel worse and worse and worse. So I think that's a big factor. I also think that it's a really big factor with, if we don't have this knowledge, like I said from the beginning, about our bodies, and if the husband does not have knowledge about our bodies and the way things function, then we end up with this disconnect there as well. And then there's also this thing called andropause, and it's happening earlier in men as well, where their testosterone starts to subtly decline, and that's happening earlier, and that changes the way their brain works. That changes the way they feel, right? That's, I'm not going to relate it too directly to dad bod, but I hate that trend. No, where's our testosterone in our men? It is plummeting. Studies are showing that it is plummeting. Since the late 90s, Dr. Shana Swan has done a lot of research on this with sperm counts and how rapidly and exponentially they are plummeting. And so it's changing our men as well. And the factors are similar. Those external environmental chemical factors are similarly affecting both of us. But again, the woman, because we're more dynamic, we tend to have more obvious symptoms with that. So over time, it accumulates, spills into other areas of our lives. And at some point, we don't feel well enough for intimacy, let alone have enough testosterone and estrogen and progesterone to want the intimacy, or low estrogen and vaginal dryness, and it hurts now. And, all of these things wrap up into a strain on that relationship. Well, the man's thinking, is it me? Because my body has changed too. And, we're not validating each other enough and looking externally to say, all of this out here is preventing us from being our best selves. Mm-hmm. So it really just boils down to education and being proactive, being preventative with your health.
Yeah. I definitely think, like amongst sort of the single dating culture, the millennials, kind of like what my main audience is here. I feel like, cause I am very, I guess you could say, hyper aware, or much more aware than the average person of health and wellness. It's just, I've said many times on the podcast, I'm just super health nerd, or you could call me a hippie, but it's just something that I'm always thinking about and interested in, and I'm, passionate about it. And so I see people sort of in the beginning phases of what you just described. So, right. They're starting to create really bad habits that I look at that person that I know and see, well, there's definitely some hormonal imbalances there. That person definitely doesn't get enough sleep. They're not prioritizing, eating right. And then you start to see that slow compounding, like you described. And, or even drinking, people resorting to drinking to feel good because they don't know what feeling good normally day to day, Monday through Thursday feels like. I actually have backed way off of drinking over the last couple of years. Like it's at a very minimum for me, because as I've continued on my health journey, I feel so good day to day that when I drink, I feel like, a little looser, a little more relaxed in the moment, but I feel so much worse the week following after drinking just even one night. But people who don't feel that, everything's relative. So if you're not feeling amazing when you're sober day to day, then yeah, when you go out and binge drink, you're going to feel way better. It's like an instant gratification, a short-term satisfaction for something that you're not getting that you're supposed to be getting day to day. So that's a whole other thing too, is this culture of like going out and drinking, and then that's going to just add to the compounding effect. That's going to add more inflammation. I mean, alcohol definitely destroys your gut, destroys your hormones, destroys your brain. So I think it's happening. I don't know if it's happening earlier and earlier in people's lives, but it seems like it is. So I think I would argue that having all of those factors, all those bad habits now, 20, 30 years from now, it's only going to be worse, and you're only going to be feeling worse. And then I feel like you would just wake up one day and be like, what is this life? Like, I didn't choose this. I don't want this. It doesn't feel good. I'm not happy, because it's just going to, that chain's finally going to break, like you said. That's kind of why I want to have this conversation, because it's so much bigger than just like, oh, how do I balance my hormones and like have less PMS symptoms? Because while that's a big factor, it's so much bigger than that. And in my opinion, the person that you choose to be your life partner is the most important decision you'll ever make. And how can you make that decision well if you yourself are not well?
Right.
You're not thinking from a healthy place or behaving from a healthy place.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So how should our hormones feel and look day to day? And how should our hormones influence our choices and our love life? If you're thinking about what a like perfectly healthy, happy, balanced woman looks like, someone who's doing all the right things, like, we can't avoid toxins, but minimizing them, getting rid of them, like everything's perfectly how it's supposed to be. What in a perfect world should that look like, and how should our hormones affect our decisions?
I think it should all be pretty stable, really, and not have a lot of big swings, right? I am a big fan of trusting your gut, but I'll also say be cautious of trusting your hormones, right?
Yeah.
Because your hormones help dictate how your gut feels too. So, I think the easiest way to answer that is really just that everything should be pretty well balanced. Women are often surprised when I say, yeah, I know when my period's coming within the next 24, 48 hours because of a very subtle little twinge. That's it. That's it. You shouldn't have these major cramps or be down and out. Yeah, I may take that as a sign that my body might could use a little bit more rest. And maybe once I've kind of let myself have a little bit more rest, maybe I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I don't want to be social tonight. So it's very subtle. I think that, this really just boils down to carving out for yourself 10 to 15 minutes every morning and just taking a few deep breaths and doing some self inventory every day. How do I feel? Why do I feel that way? And just letting things kind of get back to the center of who you are. And ultimately, if things are really well balanced, things are pretty stable. Despite our 4 dynamic phases throughout the month, there's subtle changes. And so if anything feels drastic or very painful or very emotional, that's not stability, right? There's something happening there. So if everything is normal and as it should be, yeah, it's pretty stable throughout the month with little twinges of self-information that help you make the best choices just to honor where your body's at on a day-to-day.
Yeah. Something I'm just kind of thinking about now too is, we have a lot of hormones in our body aside from just, the basics that most people know about, like estrogen, testosterone. What about things like oxytocin? And because, that's like the love hormone, if I'm right. Like that's what makes you feel amazing and in love and attached. Is that affected at all by the things that we're talking about? Like those other hormones so let's say if you're a woman who you tend to fall quickly, like you tend to fall in love really fast, and like you feel those feel good hormones really strongly and really quickly and early on, and you're someone who like maybe you're like, oh, I'm just a hopeless romantic, but then there's also the fall of it too. So when you get your heart broken, it's like the world around you is collapsing, and you have these like high highs and low lows. Is that at all, can you correlate that at all to body health issues or brain health issues?
I would say if the hormones that we've been discussing so far, so estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, if they're out of whack, then yeah, it will definitely impact a lot of that. And I'd say just make women make decisions that others kind of go, what? Those kinds of things. Just to summarize all those decisions where others are like, are you sure? But some of that does boil down even just psychologically into love styles and things like that. Some people are more romantic than others, and some people have a very logical type of approach at love, which is more me, right? Is more just kind of logical, like, okay, yeah, this is probably going to make sense, sure. Obviously, there's love and there's all the good stuff there too, but some of that boils down to just differences, right? But yes, if things are over and above and beyond with the feelings, yes, there's oxytocin and there's these other neurotransmitters, which is certainly not my scope, but they can be pushed around just the same way that estrogens can be pushed around too, right?
That's interesting.
So yeah. So,
Yeah.
and the opposite of that could be true, that if progesterone's low, if testosterone's low, maybe that's also not necessarily normal if someone's too logical or too level-headed about love and romance and those kinds of things. Well, maybe that might be more of a hormone deficiency there, right?
Mm.
So, yeah, I think it does definitely play a role.
Yeah. And that kind of goes into what I want to ask you about men too. I love that you put emphasis on them as well, because I think in our society, like it flies way under the radar how men's hormones affect everything as well. And affect their behavior tremendously, affect fertility more than people think it does. So like, I feel like it's definitely a thing. And I'm thinking of a friend who I just had a conversation with her about a guy that she was dating that she's no longer dating. And I was like, he definitely has some severely low testosterone, and just the way she was describing how the relationship went and why she ultimately broke up with him. And, so bring us kind of into the male hormone cycle and how that shouldn't look if it's imbalanced, and how maybe that could affect some of their behaviors and their attraction to women, their love lives, and maybe what is important for us to know about them that we don't know, or most people don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So the main hormone for men is testosterone. They have and they need estrogen and other hormones, of course. But testosterone really is the biggest player and the biggest element of conversation here for men. If it is on the lower end, and look, if you're getting your testosterone run, you need to run free and total testosterone, not just total, because we need to see that your body can actually free up enough of that. Okay, so you have to look at both parts of that. Not to mention thyroid and other things. I'll run more of a full panel on any male who has symptoms of low T. So symptomatically, if there's depression or just kind of lack of interest, lack of drive, like just kind of comes home and is just kind of not very interested, low sex drive is certainly a factor too. Or maybe libido is okay, but we have erectile dysfunction symptoms. Now that doesn't always have to be testosterone. That can even be blood flow, right? That can be other things that might just need different elements of nutrition, right? Because sometimes that's a very simple problem before we have to go to some medications. So yeah, low testosterone, but it's also going to affect brain health from a stance of mental health in men. It's a really big factor there. And depression in men is increasingly a problem. And so yeah, there's a big factor with that. But here's something that is maybe the most common thing that I see with male patients with low testosterone. Their body might be making enough, but if it's over converting to estrogen, then they might be making enough and emptying it at a faster rate. So then we end up with low T overall. Because here's the thing, that conversion, this happens in women too, but again, primarily we're talking about men here. If a man is overweight or starts to have blood sugar issues or insulin issues, high sugar diet, high carb diet, we increase, or even inflammation. And inflammation can be coming from all other things. We increase the rate of that conversion. So when you have a male who is even just a little bit overweight, who doesn't have a great diet, maybe eats excess sugar or excess carbs, and is not active, right? We know that he's over converting to estrogen. And in the male physiology, higher estrogen is not good and lower testosterone is not good, especially for mental health. And so we see that really spilling over into that mental health side of things. And well, you tie that together with a female with hormone imbalances, and we've just kind of got this mess that no one's really talking about in terms of a relationship and compatibility.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you mean when you say the conversion?
So the body turns things into something else all the time, right? So even when we say estrogen, I'm thinking there's 3 forms of estrogen that each convert down to all these other forms of estrogen. So it's all about, we have something, we have the hormone, and your body is constantly using it, therefore converting it to something else. So with testosterone, it can use testosterone in other ways. It can become other hormones, other androgens, and it can do things directly, or it can be turned into estrogen. And so that's the conversion.
Okay. Interesting. I did not know that. What would be some of the causes, or what are some of the causes that you see for low testosterone in men? Because I will say, most of the men that I have talked to just on the podcast or in general, I think they're very aware that low testosterone is extremely common now, and it's becoming more and more of a problem at younger and younger ages. And I don't know that it's really being addressed very well. I think that there's just a lot of medication solutions. So just getting testosterone injections. I mean, men can get that really easily. If they do have erectile dysfunction, now the Blue Chew is like all over every ad, plastered everywhere. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that they can do that they think is like solving the problem. So, which is not. And I can't imagine if that's going on when you're 30 years old, what's going to happen when you're 50 years old. Can you give us sort of a picture of the root cause of some of those things, and what, kind of like we talked about with women, what could happen later down the road if it's not addressed?
Yeah, I think that the two biggest categories are the things that we spray, so pesticides, herbicides, things like that, and plastics.
Okay, so it's kind of the same for men.
Very similar, yeah. And the thing is that the phthalates in particular are really, and this is where the research of Dr. Shana Swan comes into play, where she's studied these phthalates in plastic. They're the chemical component of plastics that are harming us, and how it is causing directly a plummeting sperm count. And so it really has a lot to do with the toxicity around us. And that's why it's just so important to be consumer aware. Right? And you said it earlier, we're not going to avoid toxins. That's never the goal. Don't put that goal on yourself. You will go crazy trying. That's not the goal. The goal is just to become aware and then choose this over that, right? Go category by category, but it is affecting men and women in a similar way, but different outcomes.
Yeah.
Testosterone for men is really important for the developing brain. So as a male or female ages, estrogen is really supporting the female brain. Testosterone is really supporting the male brain. Mm-hmm. So, what's another factor that we know is just increasing exponentially in rates? Cognitive decline, dementia, right? We need to be caring for our brains with this very proactive understanding of how many things affect our brain over time. And it includes hormones. In a good way. We want hormones are a good support of the brain.
Yeah. That's scary. You mentioned phthalates. Is that how you pronounce it? I never know how to say that word, but,
yeah,
I remembered, so it's spelled so weird, but I remember when I first became aware of what they were many years ago, and I was reading some sort of article about, Glade plugins, like the wall plugins that are air fresheners. And I had those like in almost every room in my house, because of course they smell good, but it was like they're just full of phthalates, and it's super toxic and like correlated to cancer, I think was the article I was reading. And so I immediately unplugged them all, never used them again. And now I can't stand it. Like when I walk into a house, that I immediately know when they have the Glade plugins, and my body like now rejects those. I'll start sneezing, my eyes start watering, and it's crazy because I'm like, I don't know how I ever lived this way with them in every single room in my house. But things like that, I know, and if people who know me, like I'm the most annoying friend that I will literally unplug their Glade plugins if I'm like staying at their house or something. I'm like, this is going to give you cancer. So there's a lot of things like that people are just unaware of, that it does kind of fly under the radar. So I love what you said of just being aware and sort of choosing this over that, having that awareness, so that if you're standing in the store looking at air fresheners, you can choose one that's less toxic, or you can choose even like a soy wax candle over a regular candle, or you can choose a non-toxic cleaner over, bleach or whatever. So there's a lot of that stuff is readily available now, or like sunscreen, which is so controversial, but,
Yes.
So, to kind of start closing us out, what are some, aside from what you just described with this awareness and just kind of conscious decision making, what are some tips that you have for anyone, men or women, for healthy hormones and just overall better health that's going to benefit everyone?
Yeah, I think, and you kind of said this earlier, but one of my biggest pieces of advice here would be just putting your health first. It is that important. It really is. And I know, well, let me say this differently, because I think this has changed, thankfully, in the last couple of years, at least what I see online, right? It seems to have changed where it used to be such a drag or like, what are you doing if you were making more health conscious choices? And now it's a little bit trendy, right? People are talking about the non-toxic skincare lines and things like that. I love to see it. So put your health first. It is that important. You don't want to be someone who never had problems, never had symptoms. And then, you reach the age of 35 or 40 and it's like, oh, I wasn't having a bunch of symptoms, but my body was keeping the score of that. And now I'm paying the price, right? And just to nail that point home, I do a lot of blood work. I test things quite deeply. I go ahead and start turning over rocks, even in someone who's young and maybe not very symptomatic. And we almost always find quite a bit that we need to address, right? Lots of inflammation, lots of nutritional issues, maybe fatty liver already or high elevating liver enzymes, lots of things that, my 25-year-olds are like, what? You found what? Yeah, hon, you don't feel it yet because your body's still young and compensating, but you just wait, right? If this isn't addressed. So just put your health first would be my first recommendation there. Make it cool. Make it your own. Another thing to say would just be really the importance of talking things out and communicating with whatever relationship that is, whether it's a romantic relationship, a sister, a mother. Have the conversations, because truly the emotions that we experience throughout life, whether they're little micro traumas within the family or bigger traumas or, distance that we've put between family members or your relationships, whatever it may be, those emotions that we feel are also hormones. So you brought up oxytocin, but there's serotonin. There's all these other chemicals in our body, which are hormones, and our emotions are also hormones. And so if we don't talk things through, we don't land the plane there, right? And we're still dealing with this issue in the body. And like I said, the body keeps the score. It's one of my favorite phrases. It's also a book title if you want to look into that. But the body will keep that score. It will remember these things for you if you don't talk them out. My mom was always a big fan growing up of, nope, we don't go to bed till we've talked this out. We don't go to bed angry. And it annoyed me so much through my teen years, but man, it's one of the best things she ever taught me. And so that is a rule for my husband and I. We might need to take a minute, right? Like I might need to go think and you might need to go think and we might need a minute, but we're not going to go to bed angry. We will come back around and we will talk this through. I don't care about the time. We are more important than that, right? And so treat your relationships like that. And maybe if you're in that dating phase and kind of still interviewing people, so to speak, that can be an interview question of, how do you feel about this, right? How are you able to square up with me and talk and tell me how you feel? A lot of people don't even know how to tell themselves how they feel. So that can be a big requirement in the dating world. So yeah, maybe leave it at those two for the time.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that could be a whole other podcast, but emotions and trauma and how that gets stored in the body. And that kind of takes you into Chinese medicine as well, which I'm a big fan of too. Things like acupuncture can be super healing for the most unsuspecting things, like grief or heartache or stress. I mean, stress will kill you straight up. Like stress is probably, you could argue, the number one killer in general. I have recently been doing some work on my liver, part of, the estrogen thing we talked about. And then, I was having some symptoms of high histamine, and you had made a couple posts about that as well, which were super helpful. But, and I've done a couple of liver detoxes over the last few years, and the emotions that come out when I do a liver detox is, talk about, it's like PMS on steroids for me. The irritability, the anger, because in Chinese medicine, for the people that don't know, liver stores anger, if I'm correct. And, kind of those unresolved, angry, tense emotions. And so, I know could be controversial to some people, but to me, it's not at all. I was not like you. I was raised very conventional. I ate processed food and high sugar, and antibiotics were the solution for everything. And ibuprofen was, if you're sick, you're taking ibuprofen every 4 hours, Motrin every 8 hours. Like, it was not at all what I would consider healthy. And so I've lived both sides, is my point. And so the stuff is real, and your body does keep the score. And there's so much in our environment and in the lifestyle that we live as Americans that if it's unaddressed, or if you're unaware of it, it'll kill you before you can even become aware of it. So yeah, stress, high cortisol, stuff like that. So again, this could be a 5-hour long podcast, but I think you said it best, putting your health first. And on that note, can you give us some resources? Like, if people are wanting to, if they're hopefully inspired to kind of start looking into their health and uncovering some of those rocks, where should they go? Because, we don't want them to just go to their PCP down the road. So where should people, especially women, for women's health, be going to get care in functional medicine, and kind of in regards to what we're talking about?
Yeah, so there's a website resource, ifm.org, so the Institute of Functional Medicine.org, and they have an option on their website where you can look up providers near you. Now, those are only going to be the providers that are IFM certified, so I didn't go that route with my certifications. I'm not on that website, but it's a good starting point where you kind of see some people in the area, or just Google holistic health coach, right? Or functional medicine health coach, or and I think health coaching is really, really powerful for someone who maybe doesn't feel that bad, and they're just kind of like, well, I resonate with this information. I just want more of this information in my life. How can I make it personal to me? A good holistic health coach would be awesome with that, right? But if you are thinking, I want some testing done, I want to look deeper into this, I want to maybe work on my liver and work on these things with more protocol type stuff, then you definitely want to find a functional medicine doctor to join your team. And I do think, there's pros and cons with the social media realm with holistic health people, but I think that there's a lot to be learned there as well. If someone seems like they're just selling something every other breath and every other post, like, maybe not them, but there's a lot that can be learned from, for example, what I try to share online is just free information to get people thinking for themselves, but also maybe taking some steps and taking some action and realizing, oh, that worked, I want more, right? The right people on social media can also be very helpful with that too.
Yeah. And the work that you you do any telemedicine, or is it all just local where you are?
So I do some telemedicine, but a lot of times if it's not within states that I'm licensed in, I will just do more of a consult and do more of like a health coaching session.
Okay, gotcha. So, so people could reach out to you for any sort of coaching or advice or anything like that. And then ifm.org, that's actually where I found my doctor. So for those of you in the Houston area, I highly recommend Dr. Rowley, Rowley. She is at Kale Medicine, which is over off of Westcott Street. So amazing functional medicine doctor. And I'm sure there's dozens in Houston, but she's great. We hit on it earlier, but I wanted to ask you, for the women that are still here, that are still listening, that haven't, ended the podcast yet thinking that we're kooks, are there any good birth control options that you recommend? So maybe for someone who's not on the pill or has recently got off or is thinking about getting off, what could be another solution that for people who are sexually active but are not ready to get pregnant?
Yeah, this probably should be another podcast episode for us of educating on cycle mapping. So if you look into LH strips, or OPKs, ovulation predictor kits, which is testing LH, they're urine strips, and if you use those right after your period ends, you can start those daily in the morning until you get a peak. That tells you that your fertile window is there, it's arrived. So once you know what that day is, roughly cycle day 12 to 14 on average, then you can kind of back up the next few days and know that it actually started a few days earlier. Okay, so LH strips, and then measure somehow body temperature changes. I use my Oura ring. You can use a thermometer. You can use Daisy. There's a lot of options here. But once you see your body temperature rise, that's the closure of it. So it's called the family planning method, and there's many ways to do this. There's a lot of different things you can track. There is no right or wrong if you're doing it thoroughly. So I think that if you can identify the beginning and the end, which is really just a 48-hour window of your fertile window, and then back that up a little bit, because sperm can live there for a little bit of time, then you've identified when you're fertile and then when you're not fertile. I mean, just, a lot of women don't know. I didn't know for the longest time that you're not fertile your entire cycle. And so identifying that window is really helpful. Now, obviously, that's a natural method about that, which, again, there's more details we could certainly talk about at a later date.
Yeah, yeah. So you have your fertile window and your not fertile window. So if you're outside your fertile window and you kind of extend those days a little bit, you're probably safe. Nothing's going to happen. You can't get pregnant. So if you're inside your fertile window, do you recommend just being extra careful, or is it like you probably shouldn't have sex at all, or what's kind of the solution there? Because that's no fun to be like, when I'm horniest, I can't have sex.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe those 48 hours, maybe right when you get that LH peak, so that day and the next, until you see your body temperature rise, maybe that's kind of the no-go zone, right? If you're being ultimately super careful. But otherwise, barrier methods and pull-out methods and, combining other things can definitely be pretty successful when done correctly and when timed correctly. And that's the intimidating part for a lot of women, is that it does require you to track these things throughout your cycle, but it's really not too much more effort than remembering to take a pill every day, right? Which, some people forget that too, but it's, if you're learning about your body, then this is something to do anyways, even if you're not sexually active. Just learning your body, tracking these numbers, seeing what's normal or abnormal or inside ranges, out of ranges. It's just more empowering to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. And I know I see a lot of friends who they set a daily timer to take their pill so that they don't forget. But you could also set a daily reminder to check your calendar and see where you're at in your cycle. I mean, you can do that through all kinds of different apps, but even just the health app on the iPhone is what I use, just to get a basic understanding of what day you're on. So that's awesome. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with, like any other tidbits of advice, or just anything else that you think would be super valuable to the audience?
I would just say be curious. There's just so much that most women, we don't know about ourselves. And I think that it can really be empowering to learn about who you are, your essence and everything of through balance and unbalance, and see what's normal and abnormal for you. Become your own greatest advocate through that knowledge. So, but otherwise, I think we left it all on the plate today. So
that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Be curious. That's a big part of my personality, and that's how I got to where I am now. I mean, I have a long story of my health journey and stuff that led me into functional medicine, but it always starts with curiosity. And then I'm sure you can relate to this, once you uncover certain things, like once you see certain things, you can't unsee them, Right. So, and then it's just, you're going to become more and more curious and start to feel better. And it's just kind of uphill from there. So if you guys have any questions in regards to anything that we talked about, definitely reach out to Dr. Heidt. I will tag her below in the comments and the description and everything. And you can reach out to me as well. So thank you so much. Great conversation. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode of That's What He Said. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you're taking away something valuable that will benefit your dating life. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give this show a follow, rate, and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like this video, and most importantly, comment below, because I want to hear what you said. See you next time. Thank you.